1 year of silence. The U.S. mastermind who trained robbers to steal America's biggest bank. If you're ready to dive into one of the most calculated crimes in American history, smash that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about bank robberies. Drop a comment below if you think you could spot a criminal mastermind hiding in plain sight. Let's get into it. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in March, when the morning shift manager at Continental Federal Bank in downtown Chicago arrived to find the vault door already open. Not forced. Not damaged. Just open. The steel mechanism that required 3 separate key codes, 2 physical keys, and a time-delayed lock system had been disarmed as smoothly as someone unlocking their front door. Inside, the cash drawers were empty. $12 million had vanished into the cold Illinois dawn. But here's what made Detective Sarah Mendoza's blood run cold. There were no signs of panic. No broken glass, no disabled cameras, no cut wires. The surveillance footage showed 5 individuals moving through the bank with the calm efficiency of employees closing up for the night. They knew exactly where to walk to avoid certain camera angles. They knew which drawers to open and which to leave untouched. They even knew the exact 90-second window when the silent alarm's backup battery would be switching over, creating a gap in the alert system. This wasn't a robbery. This was a surgical extraction. Mendoza had been tracking financial crimes for 14 years, and she'd seen every variation of desperation and greed the human mind could conjure. But this was different. These weren't junkies looking for a quick score or desperate gamblers trying to pay off debts. These were professionals. And professionals don't just appear overnight. The investigation led her to a pattern that had been invisible until now. Over the past 18 months, similar robberies had occurred in 7 different cities across the United States: Seattle, Denver, Atlanta, Boston, Miami, Phoenix, and now Chicago. Each one executed with the same eerie precision. Each one yielding between $8 and $15 million. Each one leaving behind 0 forensic evidence and a growing sense of dread among federal investigators. Someone was teaching them. Someone patient. Someone brilliant. The break came from an unlikely source. A warehouse owner in Gary, Indiana, contacted local police about suspicious activity in a property he'd rented out 14 months earlier. The tenant had paid cash, 6 months upfront, and had requested absolute privacy. When the lease expired and the tenant never returned, the owner finally entered the space. What he found made him reach for his phone with shaking hands. The walls were covered with blueprints. Not just of one bank, but dozens. Floor plans, security protocols, employee schedules, shift rotations. There were psychological profiles of bank managers, detailed analyses of local police response times, and minute-by-minute breakdowns of how human beings react under stress. In the center of the room stood a full-scale mock-up of a bank vault, constructed from plywood and metal, complete with a functioning lock mechanism. But it was the blackboard that stopped Mendoza cold when she arrived at the scene. Written in neat, methodical handwriting were rules. Rule 1. Panic is the enemy. Rule 2. Speed without precision is failure. Rule 3. The plan is gospel. Rule 4. Silence is survival. This wasn't a criminal. This was a teacher. And somewhere out there, his students were still operating. Mendoza photographed everything, cataloged every blueprint, every note, every scrap of evidence. The handwriting analysis would take weeks. The fingerprint processing would take longer. But there was something else, something that made her skin prickle with unease. In the corner of the warehouse, she found a calendar. Dates were marked in red. 8 dates, spanning from 14 months ago to 3 weeks from now. 7 of those dates matched the robberies exactly. The 8th date was still coming, and it was circled 3 times. Someone was planning one final job, the biggest one yet. But when Mendoza's team started running the blueprints through their database, trying to identify which bank was being targeted next, the computer flagged something impossible. The blueprints didn't match any single bank. They matched 5. 5 different locations, 5 different cities, all marked with the same date. Mendoza stared at the screen, her mind racing through the implications. This wasn't one final robbery. This was a coordinated, simultaneous attack. 5 teams, 5 targets, 1 mastermind. And they had less than 3 weeks to stop it. She reached for her phone to call the FBI task force, but then she noticed something that made her freeze. There, tucked beneath one of the blueprints, was a photograph. It showed 6 people standing in this very warehouse, facing the camera. Their faces were calm, focused, ready. But it was the 7th figure that made Mendoza's hands tremble. Standing behind them, slightly out of focus, was someone wearing a simple black mask. The architect. The teacher. The ghost who had spent a year turning ordinary criminals into the most dangerous robbery crew in American history. But when they finally identified the first member of the crew 2 days later through a partial fingerprint on one of the blueprints, what they discovered changed everything they thought they knew about this case. The student becomes the witness. The fingerprint belonged to Marcus Webb, a 32-year-old former Marine with an honorable discharge and a clean record. No prior arrests. No known gang affiliations. No financial troubles. He worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company in Milwaukee, paid his taxes on time, and volunteered at a veterans center every other weekend. On paper, Marcus Webb was the last person who should be robbing banks. But when federal agents kicked down his apartment door at 4 in the morning, they found something that made the impossible suddenly, terrifyingly real. Marcus was gone. His apartment was empty, stripped clean of furniture, personal belongings, and any trace that he'd ever lived there. The only thing remaining was a single envelope taped to the bathroom mirror, addressed to Detective Sarah Mendoza. Inside was a handwritten letter. Marcus's words were careful, measured, and laced with something Mendoza hadn't expected: remorse. Detective, by the time you read this, I'll be far from Milwaukee. I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not making excuses. But you need to understand what you're dealing with. The man who trained us, we called him the architect, he didn't find criminals. He created us. He found people like me, veterans, logistics experts, security consultants, people with skills but also people with cracks. A divorce. A bankruptcy. A medical debt we couldn't pay. He studied us for months before he ever made contact. When he finally approached me, he knew everything: my daughter's illness, my ex-wife's lawyer fees, the fact that I was 3 months from losing everything. He offered me a way out. Not with threats. With opportunity. Mendoza's hands tightened on the letter as she continued reading. The training lasted 11 months. We never met in the same location twice. We studied human behavior, stress responses, how security systems fail under specific conditions. He taught us that violence was amateur hour, that the best crimes were the ones that looked impossible after the fact. But here's what you need to know: the architect never showed his face. We never heard his real voice. Everything was filtered, distorted, controlled. And after each robbery, he paid us and then vanished for months. We were never a crew. We were students taking separate final exams. The letter ended with a single sentence that made Mendoza's stomach drop. The 5 banks marked on those blueprints? That's not his final exam. That's ours. He's testing whether we learn to work without him. But I can't do it anymore. I'm turning myself in. Check the storage unit at 4157 West Industrial Boulevard, Milwaukee. Locker 237. You'll find everything I took. And you'll find something else, something that might help you stop what's coming. By noon, Mendoza was standing in front of Locker 237 with a full tactical team. Inside, they found Marcus's share of the Chicago robbery, nearly $2 million in vacuum-sealed bags, stacked neatly like evidence waiting to be discovered. But it was the cardboard box in the corner that made Mendoza's pulse spike. Inside were recordings. Dozens of them. Audio files on USB drives, each one labeled with dates and locations. Marcus had been secretly recording the training sessions. The architect's voice came through the speakers like cold water, calm, patient, almost paternal. But it was the content that revealed the true horror of his methodology. He didn't just teach them how to rob banks. He taught them how to think like predators. How to identify weaknesses in people, systems, and institutions. How to exploit trust. How to make chaos look like precision. Fear is your enemy, the architect's distorted voice explained in one recording. The moment you feel adrenaline, you've already lost. You must operate from a place of absolute certainty. When you walk into that bank, you are not a criminal. You are a technician performing a procedure. The money is not theirs. It was always yours. You're simply collecting what the system owes you. Mendoza listened to hours of recordings, her team frantically working to analyze the voice patterns, searching for any slip that might reveal his identity. But the architect was too careful. Every word was measured. Every lesson was designed to insulate himself while empowering his students. Then, on the 18th recording, something changed. The architect's tone shifted, became almost philosophical. You've learned the mechanics. Now I'll teach you the truth. Banks are not buildings. They're belief systems. People believe their money is safe, so it is. The moment that belief cracks, the entire system collapses. What we're doing isn't theft. It's a demonstration. We're proving that security is an illusion, that order is temporary, and that anyone with patience and precision can reshape reality. Mendoza stopped the recording. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about something darker. A man trying to prove that the systems people trusted could be dismantled by anyone smart enough to study them. The breakthrough came from the voice analysis team. They couldn't identify the architect, but they found something else: background noise. In 3 of the recordings, there was a distinct sound pattern, a low-frequency hum consistent with industrial refrigeration units. Cross-referencing that with the locations of the training warehouses, they identified a possible area. A 4-block radius in industrial Baltimore, near the harbor. Mendoza assembled a task force. They had 16 days until the marked date. 16 days to find a ghost who'd been operating in shadows for over a year. But as her team mobilized, Mendoza received a call that made her blood freeze. Marcus Webb had been found dead in a motel room just outside Pittsburgh. Single gunshot wound to the head. Staged to look like suicide, but the forensics told a different story. Marcus had been executed. The architect knew someone had talked. And he was cleaning up loose ends. Mendoza stared at the case board in her office. Photographs of the training warehouse, blueprints of the 5 target banks, and now Marcus Webb's crime scene photos. The pattern was becoming clear. The architect didn't just plan robberies. He planned contingencies. He'd anticipated betrayal, prepared for it, and eliminated it with the same cold precision he'd taught his students. But Marcus's death revealed something crucial. The architect was still watching. Still active. Still in control. And if he knew about Marcus, he might know about the investigation. He might know they were coming. Mendoza's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. No words. Just a photograph. It showed her standing outside the Milwaukee storage unit earlier that day, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. The message was clear. I see you. She looked up at her team, her mind racing through the implications. They weren't just hunting the architect anymore. He was hunting them. And somewhere in Baltimore, or perhaps somewhere else entirely, he was watching, waiting, and preparing for his final lesson. The question wasn't whether they could find him before the 5 banks were hit. The question was whether he wanted to be found, and what would happen when they finally came face to face with the man who'd turned patience into the deadliest weapon of all. When the hunter becomes the hunted. The photograph of Mendoza outside the storage unit changed everything. The architect wasn't just ahead of them. He was watching their every move, turning the investigation itself into another training exercise. Mendoza pulled her entire team into a secure operations room and made a decision that went against every investigative instinct she had. They would go dark. No more field operations. No more warehouse searches. No more visible movements that could be photographed or tracked. Instead, they would do what the architect had done for over a year. They would become invisible, methodical, patient. They would hunt him the way he'd hunted his victims. The breakthrough came from the voice recordings Marcus had left behind. The audio team ran the files through advanced spectrum analysis, isolating not just the background refrigeration hum, but something else. A rhythmic clicking sound, barely audible, occurring every 47 seconds. It took 3 days to identify the source. It was a railroad crossing signal, the kind that activates when freight trains pass through industrial areas. Cross-referencing that timing with freight schedules in the Baltimore area, They identified a single location where trains passed at precisely that interval, a stretch of abandoned warehouses near Curtis Bay, less than 2 miles from the harbor. The area had been scheduled for demolition for over a year, making it the perfect location for someone who needed privacy and didn't plan to stay long. Mendoza didn't send tactical teams. She didn't flood the area with agents. Instead, she positioned 2 undercover officers as homeless individuals in the area, equipped with hidden cameras and audio devices. They would watch, document, and wait. For 6 days, nothing happened. Then, on the 7th day, they saw him. A man in his mid-40s, carrying a weathered briefcase, entered one of the condemned warehouses at exactly 11 p.m. He stayed for 3 hours. The cameras captured him reviewing documents, making phone calls on an encrypted satellite phone, and marking dates on a calendar. When he left, he locked the door behind him with a padlock that looked rusted and old but was actually brand new. Mendoza watched the footage a dozen times, studying his movements, his mannerisms, the way he checked his surroundings before entering and after leaving. This was someone who understood surveillance, who expected to be watched, who had turned paranoia into an art form. They ran his face through every database available. Nothing. No matches. No records. It was as if he didn't exist. But Mendoza noticed something in the way he walked, a slight favoring of his left leg, the kind of injury pattern consistent with military service or law enforcement training. She made a call to the Bureau's personnel division with a specific request: pull the files of every former federal agent, analyst, or contractor who'd been dismissed, resigned under pressure, or left with unresolved disciplinary issues in the past 5 years. Cross-reference anyone with tactical training and a background in behavioral psychology. The list came back with 43 names. Mendoza's team worked through them methodically, eliminating candidates based on age, physical characteristics, and current whereabouts. By the end of the 2nd day, they had narrowed it down to 7 possibles. The 3rd name on that list made Mendoza's blood run cold. Dr. James Corrigan, former FBI behavioral analyst, dismissed 3 years earlier for ethical violations and unauthorized contact with criminal subjects. His personnel file painted a picture of brilliance twisted by obsession, a man who believed he understood criminals better than anyone else in the Bureau, who'd crossed lines in the name of research, who'd been warned repeatedly about his methods before finally being terminated. His last known address was in Washington, D.C., but when agents checked, they found the apartment had been vacant for over 2 years. His credit cards hadn't been used in 18 months. His cell phone had been disconnected. Dr. James Corrigan had erased himself from existence the same way he'd taught his students to disappear. But Mendoza had something he didn't expect: patience to match his own. She didn't raid the warehouse. She didn't confront him. Instead, she had her team install microcameras inside the building during a carefully timed window when they knew he wouldn't be there. They positioned devices in the ceiling beams, behind loose bricks, inside electrical boxes. Places a paranoid man would never think to check because they required the building itself to be compromised. What they captured over the next 4 days was chilling in its mundanity. Dr. Corrigan wasn't planning the 5-bank heist at all. He was orchestrating something far more elaborate, a systematic dismantling of the entire operation he'd spent a year building. He was eliminating his students, one by one, erasing every connection that could lead back to him. The recordings showed him making calls, coordinating meetings, setting traps. Marcus Webb's death hadn't been about betrayal. It had been about completion. The architect had always planned to eliminate his crew once they'd served their purpose. The 5-bank blueprints weren't a final exam. They were bait, designed to draw out anyone who might consider turning on him. Mendoza realized with horror that there were 4 other names on Marcus's team, and if the architect was following his pattern, they were all being hunted right now. She mobilized every available resource. They identified 3 more crew members from the training warehouse evidence: Jennifer Cole, a former security consultant from Boston, Thomas Rivera, an ex-Marine from Phoenix, and David Chin, a logistics expert from Seattle. All 3 had participated in the earlier robberies. All 3 were now in danger. The race became desperate. They found Jennifer Cole first, hiding in a motel outside Philadelphia. She was terrified, paranoid, claiming she'd been receiving threats, that someone was following her. Mendoza brought her into protective custody, but Jennifer refused to talk, refused to identify the architect, refused to cooperate in any way. She kept repeating the same phrase, "He taught us that silence is survival." Thomas Rivera was found dead in his Phoenix apartment 3 days later. Single gunshot wound. Staged to look like suicide. But the forensics told a different story. He'd been executed, just like Marcus. David Shin vanished completely. His apartment was empty, his car abandoned at a bus station, his bank account drained. He'd either run or been taken. Either way, the architect was cleaning house with ruthless efficiency. Mendoza made a decision that would define the rest of the investigation. She would use the one advantage she had. Dr. Corrigan didn't know they'd identified him. He thought he was still invisible, still in control. She would let him believe that while setting a trap of her own. Using Jennifer Cole as bait, they staged a news conference announcing her cooperation with authorities, claiming she was providing detailed information about the architect's identity and methods. It was a lie, but it was a lie designed to force Dr. Corrigan's hand. The trap was set at a federal safe house in Northern Virginia, designed to look like a temporary protection facility but actually fortified with tactical teams in every surrounding building. Jennifer would be visible through windows at specific times, following a routine that suggested vulnerability while actually being protected by layers of armed agents. Dr. Corrigan took the bait exactly as Mendoza predicted. He appeared on the third night, approaching the safe house with the same careful methodology that had defined his entire operation. He disabled the exterior cameras, bypassed the alarm system, and entered through a basement window that he'd clearly surveilled in advance. But the moment he stepped inside, the trap closed. Lights flooded the building. Tactical teams emerged from concealment. Dr. James Corrigan, the architect, the ghost who'd orchestrated the most sophisticated criminal operation in modern American history, was surrounded by 30 armed federal agents with nowhere to run. He didn't resist. He simply smiled, raised his hands, and said 5 words that would haunt Mendoza for years to come: "You learned faster than expected." The interrogation revealed the full scope of his operation. Dr. Corrigan had spent 2 years planning every detail, recruiting his students with psychological precision, training them in abandoned warehouses across the country, and executing 7 successful bank robberies that netted over $70 million. But the money had never been the point. It was the demonstration, the proof that systems could be dismantled by anyone patient enough to study them. He'd planned to eliminate his entire crew from the beginning, viewing them as loose ends that would eventually compromise the operation. Marcus's guilt had simply accelerated the timeline. The 5 bank blueprints had been his final deception, designed to misdirect law enforcement while he erased his tracks. But there was one thing Dr. Corrigan hadn't counted on: his own arrogance. He'd believed his students would follow his training perfectly, that they would remain silent even in the face of death. He'd underestimated human nature, the unpredictability of people under pressure, the fact that fear doesn't always produce the obedience he'd calculated. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Dr. Corrigan represented himself, turning every session into a lecture on institutional failure, psychological manipulation, and the fragility of modern security systems. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on 38 counts including organized crime, murder, conspiracy, and theft. He was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Of the 4 remaining crew members, 2 were arrested and sentenced to terms ranging from 15 to 25 years. David Shin was never found, and his case remains open. The $70 million stolen was traced through various cryptocurrency accounts and offshore holdings, with authorities recovering approximately $19 million. The rest disappeared into financial systems so complex that forensic accountants are still attempting to unravel them. Detective Sarah Mendoza was promoted to Assistant Director of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division. She received the Bureau's Medal for Meritorious Achievement. But she never celebrated. Because in her final conversation with Dr. Corrigan before his transfer to federal prison, he told her something that kept her awake at night. "You think you won, detective. You caught me, stopped my operation, put me in a cage. But I accomplished exactly what I set out to do. I proved that your systems are vulnerable, that patience beats technology, that anyone with the right training can become invisible. And now that knowledge is out there. In police reports, court documents, news coverage. Someone's reading it right now, studying my methods, learning from my mistakes. You didn't stop anything. You just documented the blueprint for the next one. 6 months after Dr. Corrigan's imprisonment, a series of armored car robberies began occurring across the southeastern United States. 3 separate incidents, each executed with the same methodical precision, the same understanding of response patterns, the same patience that had defined the architect's operation. No arrests were made. No suspects were identified. The crews vanished as completely as if they'd never existed. Mendoza sits in her office now, reviewing the case files, comparing the new robberies to Dr. Corrigan's methods. The similarities are undeniable. Someone learned. Someone adapted. Someone improved on the original design. On her desk is a folder marked Ongoing Investigation, and inside is a single photograph. It shows a warehouse wall with words written in neat, methodical handwriting. Rule 1. Panic is the enemy. Rule 2. Speed without precision is failure. Rule 3. The plan is gospel. Rule 4. Silence is survival. But there's a 5th rule now, written below the others in different handwriting. Rule 5. The student must surpass the teacher. Dr. James Corrigan was right. They didn't stop anything. They just gave the next generation a roadmap. And somewhere in America, in an abandoned warehouse or empty building, someone is teaching. Someone patient. Someone methodical. Someone who learned that the greatest crime isn't the one that gets caught, it's the one that proves impossible to prevent. The architect sits in his federal prison cell, receiving letters from unknown senders. Some contain questions. Some contain gratitude. Some contain blueprints. He reads each one carefully, then burns them in his small steel sink, watching the ashes swirl down the drain. He smiles. The final lesson, it seems, was the one he never had to teach. Because the most dangerous knowledge isn't what you share. It's what others learn from watching you fail.